Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, taking an updated look at the Miami Hurricanes and some top targets that are still remaining for them in the transfer portal, some players, some position groups that I think would upgrade this Miami Hurricanes team heading into 2024. Now, before we get into it, I think it's worth noting there are not a lot of holes in this Miami Hurricanes roster. Like, you look top to bottom, there's not many places where the Miami Hurricanes are really needing talent. That being said, there are still players and position groups that you add some depth and experience to elevate this team coming into 2024. Miami has done a phenomenal job closing out that 2024 class, has done a phenomenal job in the transfer portal so far. Want to talk about just a few more players, position groups that could help this program heading into 2024. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. A shout out to the Miami fans. This has been a program that I've had just an absolute blast talking about. You guys have shown a ton of support. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, would love to hear from you guys, players, position groups that you think the Miami Hurricanes should be going after in the second half of that transfer portal cycle. And without further ado, let's get into it. And let's start with the position group that has been kind of in the news the most for Miami, and that's the quarterback spot. Now, you break down Miami's big board. Cam Ward, that number one option for the Miami Hurricanes. I feel good about that, right? He hasn't taken any other visits besides to Florida State. And I mean, anytime you're in the top two, you feel good about your chances. And I think a lot of Miami fans are feeling good about Cam Ward. Now, that being said, you got to have some sort of contingency plan in case something falls through with Cam Ward. He decides to go to the NFL draft, wherever he decides to do. I think Miami needs to be prepared to pivot to another player. And I think that player here is KJ Jefferson, especially with Will Howard looking like he's trending to USC. KJ Jefferson, I think, is such an underrated college football quarterback. Does not give nearly enough credit for what he's done with this Arkansas program the last couple of years. And when I'm looking at KJ Jefferson, not only are the stats there, right? 8,000 passing yards, a 65% completion percentage. Here's the number that I think a lot of Miami Hurricanes fans care a lot about. 67 touchdowns to only 18 interceptions. Through 5 years of college football at Arkansas, he takes care of the football and obviously can run the football as well. Over 1,800 rushing yards, 21 rushing touchdowns. He's an absolute load to bring down. Here's why I'm really in on KJ Jefferson. This is kind of my sales pitch for Miami Hurricane fans for KJ Jefferson being that quarterback one in Miami. One, you already know there's some interest level there. Two, I view KJ Jefferson in a situation at Arkansas in a very similar manner that Bo Nix was experiencing at Auburn, where you have a really good quarterback that just was not surrounded by a lot, right? A very bad offensive line, receivers that weren't difference makers. Bo Nix struggled at Auburn. And I think a lot of people kind of wrote him off and said, yeah, he's just not a good quarterback. Well, he goes to Oregon, where he has an elite run game. He has an elite offensive line. He has playmakers on the outside, and we all know what happened with Bo Nix the last 2 years in Eugene. I think you could see a very similar situation with KJ Jefferson, right? He's all of a sudden going from a team in the SEC in Arkansas where they're kind of outclassed up front. They don't have the playmakers on the outside. And then you go to Miami where you have one of, if not the best offensive line in the ACC, real difference makers on the outside, and an extremely strong run game. I think KJ Jefferson could thrive in this Miami Hurricanes offense. And you look at KJ and what he was dealing with in 2023 at Arkansas, a 13% sack rate on his dropbacks. That was 132nd in the country, dead last. This offensive line could not keep KJ Jefferson clean. He had faced 118 pressures up front. You look at Miami, KJ Jefferson comes to the Hurricanes. That's not going to be a problem. And we've said this time and time again. I think the Miami Hurricanes and how their roster is set up on offense, and you'll hear some people say, oh, well, why would a quarterback go want to play for Mario Cristobal? What you're focused on is what I can control. I got a great offensive line. I'm going to have a phenomenal run game. I'm going to have playmakers on the outside. And I have Shannon Dawson as the OC, who I feel like people just forget has been phenomenal developing quarterbacks going back to his time at Houston. I think Miami Hurricanes are a great landing spot with a ton of selling points for quarterbacks in the transfer portal. And so what I'm saying is if something falls through with Cam Ward, and I would agree with Miami in terms of I'm going after Cam Ward first. But if Cam Ward doesn't work out, I mean, you have KJ Jefferson, who's played a ton of football at the SEC level. KJ Jefferson will win a lot of games for the Miami Hurricanes. And if something doesn't work out with Cam Ward, I think KJ Jefferson would be a phenomenal get for Miami in the transfer portal. Now, the quarterback position is probably the position number one. And if you were to grab only one more transfer portal player, it would be at that quarterback position. I think a lot of us feel good about Cam Ward winding up in Coral Gables, but there are some other positions that Miami is still kicking the tires on. Want to talk about those as well. And let's go out to Marshall and go get a defensive end from Marshall, a guy that kind of a twofold guy, a guy that is not only a phenomenal pass rusher. You look at some of the numbers, had 18% pass rush win rate with 22 quarterback hurries on the season, had 11.5 TFLs, 22 sacks, really productive for Marshall. And obviously that pass rush was one of those things. The other thing I'm looking at is Elijah Alston, and not enough people talk about what defensive linemen do against the run, especially at that edge position. I mean, can you do your job? Can you stand up double teams? Can you make sure you maintain leverage? Elijah Alston, 21 run stops. And here's the number that I'm circled, 1.2 yards of average depth of tackle. What does that tell us? And this is a stat we look at a lot for defensive linemen. Where are you making your plays on the football field? 1 yard down the field, that's telling me that you're winning at the point of attack. You're stacking and shedding blocks and being a force in the run game. When you see defensive linemen with their average depth of tackle of 4 or 5 yards down the field, that tells you they're not winning that line of scrimmage. They're not winning the point of attack. Elijah Alston with that 1.2 yards of average depth of tackle tells you that he wins at the point of attack. He's making his plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. And the defensive line isn't necessarily a position group that you're looking at for Miami and saying, this is a massive problem. We need to go add depth and talent to that defensive line. No, it's probably going to be the best defensive line that you see in the ACC next year, maybe outside of Clemson. That being said, this is Mario Cristobal has made it clear. Like there's enough's not enough on the defensive line, I guess would put it frankly. I want depth. I want a ton of talent. I want this unit to be dominant, not only in the ACC, but in the country. And I think them going after a guy like Elijah Alston after the class that they're going to bring in 2024 and after landing some guys in the portal on that defensive line tells you that Mario Cristobal is dedicated to getting this defensive line to be a dominant unit, winning the point of attack. Elijah Alston would just be another name to be added to that defensive line that creates kind of just a juggernaut of a unit. Now, the only position group outside of the quarterback that if I'm Miami, I'm really kicking the tires on is probably in that secondary, right? Cornerback, safeties, you're losing a lot of veteran guys in that back end. There's some talent in the portal. The first guy I want to talk about is Damani Jackson. Just hit the transfer portal. Now, as a Michigan fan, I want Damani Jackson to head to Michigan, but he's a guy that's going to get a lot of attention. I think the narrative around Damani Jackson, and you can ask a lot of USC fans this, super talented player, was a former 5-star coming out of high school in that 2022 class, has not put it together yet during his first 2 years at USC. Now, in his defense, there's not a lot of people or players that are putting it together under that USC defensive coaching staff. So I think a lot of programs are viewing Damani Jackson as a guy that, hey, has all the traits in the world, just needs some better coaching. He is one of the bigger targets that's available in the transfer portal. And you go back to his days at high school out of modern day, I mean, checks all the boxes that you want. A 10.25 in the 100-meter dash. This guy has burning long speed, 6'1", 190 pounds. The frame is there. The movement skills are there. I guess at the end of the day, there's a reason Damani Jackson was a 5-star, and you saw that on the football field in 2023. He just struggles with some technique. He struggles with some blown coverages. When that football's in the air, he's not necessarily coached up to what to do. And so he's a guy that you don't need to change him physically. He's got all the physical tools. You need to get him in, coach him up. This is a guy that could go from not on the NFL draft's radar to being a top 100 pick in the NFL draft in 2025, given the right coaching. So Damani Jackson, certainly a guy that would add a ton of talent and depth to that cornerback room. Last guy I want to talk about, this one makes a lot of sense for Miami, and this is at the safety position, right? Obviously, a position that's been very good for Miami the last couple of years, losing some experience back there and some serious talent. I'm looking at a guy in Philip Dunham coming from Indiana. Now, the reason I choose to talk about Philip Dunham is, one, I know Miami's already reached out to him. 2, he's from Miami, Florida. And then 3, this is a guy that played a lot in 2023 and kind of fits what Miami wants to do in that back end. He's very good in coverage, faced 39 targets only gave up 18 catches. That's a 46% completion percentage for a safety in coverage. That number is very good. You look at what he's done: 6 passes defended, 3 interceptions in 2023. He has the ball skills. He has kind of that game-changing play to him in the back end. And most importantly, he's a phenomenal tackler. 13.5% missed tackle rate for a safety that has to operate and play in space. That's a very good number. That going back and looking at Miami Hurricanes and their safeties tackling, you didn't see that number pop up a lot. Phillip Dunham is a guy that can tackle, and most importantly, he's versatile. And right in this Guidry offense, like, you want to give a lot of different looks. What did they do with James Williams? Walking him in the box, sending him off the edge at times. You want your safeties to give a lot of different looks on defense, and having a safety that can do a lot of different things. You take a look at his snap count distribution: 171 snaps in the box in 2023, 169 in the slot, and then 226 as a free safety. This is a guy that's been a box defender. He's been a center fielder. He's come off the edge. He's done a lot of things for Indiana. So he's coming to Miami and saying, I can provide a lot of different assets to this Miami Hurricanes defense, all that playing at an extremely high level. And so you get down to it. There's not many holes, right? And we talk about a guy like Elijah Alston. They don't need to add another guy in that defensive line, I should say. I think the only 2 positions that you're really looking at for Miami to bolster up some depth and talent, obviously that quarterback position and probably that back end of the defense. There's a lot of talent that's in the back end of this defense that's available in the transfer portal. I wouldn't be surprised to see Miami take 1 or 2 guys to kind of go into spring practice with. And then you practice it, you go through your spring practice, and then you kind of evaluate where you are from a depth and talent standpoint, obviously taking a look at injuries. This Miami team, in my mind, is in a very good spot. And I'm really excited to see. I think at this point, you're just trying to sprinkle in a few other players to supplement this roster, get it ready for 2024. Really excited to see what Mario Cristobal is going to do. I think we know more than anyone that Mario Cristobal is going to be aggressive in terms of building this roster, getting top talent into this program. We'll be breaking it down when the news happens. Hopefully for Miami fans, we get news on Cam Ward. Like, whether he's coming to Miami, whether he's not. I mean, I think we want to see news quickly. So if he doesn't come to Miami, we're pivoting. We're going out and maybe getting KJ Jefferson. We'll see how it plays out. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys as usual. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Hope you guys all have a phenomenal Christmas, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.